So my friend and colleague, Senator Manchin from West Virginia, and I are on the floor today to talk about this issue of fentanyl. This is a deadly synthetic opioid that is killing more people in our states than any other single drug. And unbelievably, Congress only has 15 days to act. And if we don't, some of these illegal fentanyl products are going to be legal again. This is exactly the wrong thing for us to do right now, as sadly we're seeing a big increase in overdoses and overdose deaths because of the effects of the coronavirus pandemic. So we want to have bipartisan legislation that we've introduced, passed, that simply says, let's not allow these illicitly manufactured and deadly synthetic opioids to suddenly become legal again. And again, if we don't act, within 15 days, that happens. Our bill would ensure that these deadly drugs continue to be scheduled, that's the technical term, scheduled by the Drug Enforcement Agency, meaning that they would continue to be illegal. Here's why we've got to act. Fentanyl, a synthetic opioid, is more than 15 times more powerful than heroin, and it's incredibly addictive. For years, this has been coming to our shores from China, almost all of it through the mail, until more recently, because we, frankly, passed legislation to cut down on the mail deliveries, and instead now much of it is going through Mexico, coming across our southwest border. It's a big reason that overdose deaths in the United States have now surged to record highs during this COVID-19 pandemic, with more than 87,000 Americans. Think about that. 87,000 Americans died during the 12-month period between September 2019 and September 2020. That is a record. It's a terrible record. Now, when we have the actual numbers from 2020, it's going to be even worse. We just got these numbers from September 19th, 2019 till September 2020. When we have the numbers from January 2020 through December 2020, it will be even worse. That's what everybody says, and it makes sense. When you look at this data, the worst months are the months during the pandemic in 2020. So again, we are very sadly, after several years of progress, looking at once again an increase in these overdose deaths. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, synthetic opioids like fentanyl are the biggest drivers of this tragic surge. We can project that more than half of these deaths are from this class of drugs based on what we know about the 2019 data. That's the latest information we have. In 2019, there were 70,630 deaths, and more than half of those, 36,359, involved fentanyl. Experts believe, again, that fentanyl, sometimes mixed with other drugs, like cocaine or crystal meth or sometimes heroin, continues to be the #1 killer. It's such an enormous crisis because these drugs are so incredibly dangerous. It takes only 2 milligrams of fentanyl to kill an adult, which is why the DEA, Drug Enforcement Administration, permanently classified fentanyl as a Schedule II drug. In order to avoid prosecution, drug traffickers started making slight modifications to fentanyl. So you've got some evil scientist in China or in Mexico that makes a slight modification to fentanyl, sometimes adjusting a single molecule and creating what are called fentanyl analogues. In other words, it's not precisely pure fentanyl. And so, unfortunately, although it has the same narcotic properties as fentanyl, these tiny variations allows these traffickers and these scientists to evade prosecution. Oftentimes, by the way, these analogs, like carfentanil, are even more deadly, believe it or not, than fentanyl itself. In response, in 2018, the DEA temporarily scheduled fentanyl analogs, but under law, that designation expires after May 6th, again, only 15 days from now. If that deadline lapses, evil scientists and criminals who run labs in China and Mexico will be able to avoid law enforcement as they flood the United States with unlimited slight variations of this deadly drug. Again, that's why Senator Manchin and I are calling on Congress to do the sensible thing. Pass the Fight Fentanyl Act to make these dangerous substances permanently illegal. That's what law enforcement wants. That's what our communities demand. And that's what we deserve to give them. It's long overdue we make this designation permanent. China, by the way, implemented class-wide controls over fentanyl analogs in 2019. China's law defines fentanyl-related substances more broadly than the U.S. government defines fentanyl-related substances. How ironic. Here's China, a country that's sending us this poison, and actually making these drugs illegal in China, and they're not illegal here. How could that be? I know some colleagues oppose permanent scheduling of these fentanyl drugs because they are concerned about mandatory minimum sentences and also that it could hinder research into future medications to treat addiction. Let me address both of those. First, I share this concern about the harsh punishments that don't fit the nature of a crime. That's why our legislation ensures that mandatory minimum sentences are not automatically imposed. In any criminal case, we want the judge to look at the severity of the crime and consider all relevant factors in sentencing. So that issue is addressed. There has been a great deal of conversation about the impact of prosecutions and incarcerations on specific populations, including minority communities. But what is often lost in this debate is the growing impact of fatal overdoses in these same communities. Since 2016, while white fatalities have decreased through 2019, the data we have, overdoses from opioids among black Americans, particularly black men, have actually accelerated. From 2011 to 2016, black Americans had the highest increase in synthetic opioid-involved overdose death rates compared to all populations. So it's getting worse, not better, in these same minority communities. And while from 2017 to 2018, overall opioid-involved overdose fatalities decreased, remember we were making progress for the last several years. Overall, it decreased by just over 4%. Rates among black and Hispanic Americans actually increased. Another issue my colleagues have raised, again, is concern that permanently scheduling fentanyl and its analogs somehow hinders research into treating addiction. First of all, I agree that we need this research and need it badly. One example of this is coming up with naloxone, a miracle drug based on heroin that actually reverses the effects of an overdose. It's a miracle, and I've seen it work, and it saves lives. Researchers have told me there are barriers to be approved to legally research Schedule I substances. There's also a stigma to conducting this kind of research, even though we know that it could lead to the development of new treatments. I am open to working with colleagues to address these barriers, and I believe we can do that through legislation creating the flexibility in the registration system to scientists. But we cannot let these deadly fentanyl drugs become legal in the meantime. And certainly, we can't allow this to happen in the next 15 days. Just before we came to the floor this afternoon, the House of Representatives passed a temporary measure. It's a 5-month extension of the ability to schedule these deadly drugs. Why would we do it for just 5 months? Let's do it permanently. Now, I'm told, well, we've got to take it or leave it from the House. I hope that's not the case. If so, of course, I'll be for extending it rather than having it expire in 15 days. But let's act. Let's act responsibly. Let's act now. The United States Senate should be taking the lead here and saying, let's permanently classify these drugs as everybody agrees they should be classified, in the sense that they are dangerous narcotics that are killing literally tens of thousands of our fellow citizens every year. Let's do the right thing for those communities. Let's do the right thing for law enforcement. Let's be sure they have the predictability and certainty in law enforcement to know that they can prosecute these criminals, these traffickers. We need to act now to address the threat of these deadly fentanyl drugs coming into our communities. And I urge the Senate to pass the Fight Fentanyl Act this week. I yield back my time.